Next, we're going to be talking with Linda Hartley about her new book called Big Impact. Linda, thank you for being with us this evening.
Well, thank you for having me, Barbara.
Certainly. I'll tell the listeners by way of disclosure that you and I our paths have crossed a number of times working in the nonprofit sector here in Sullivan County. And, of course, always a pleasure when those paths have crossed. But then along came this book called Big Impact, Insights and Stories from America's Nonprofit Leaders. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about how this book came about.
Sure. My business partner, Vivian Hexter, and co-author of the book, have been working together in the nonprofit sector for decades now. And around the time of the presidential elections, we were feeling in need of some good news. And with all our work, working in the nonprofit sector with philanthropists, with board members, with staff, we're very much aware of the contributions that these amazing change leaders and thought leaders really across the country were making and continue to make in this country. And, good news is not very well recognized or published. And we were hoping to use this book to have what's happening in the nonprofit sector better recognized. The majority of the people we interviewed really just lined up to do it. We started the interviews right after the presidential election. And we see this book really as a way to amplify the voices of the nonprofit sector and to share the good news about the social change that they're affecting and the problems really that they're solving. Big, major problems that they're solving and implementing solutions for.
Well, it is. I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised by the content of this book. And in the beginning, I thought, just like you were saying, well, good news is not necessarily recognized and put out there as much as it should be. So we tend to think, it takes a back seat. But I started reading the book, and it was very, very inspiring material. So let me just give the listeners an idea of what's represented in the interviews here. We have Annie E. Casey Foundation, the Ford Foundation, Ms. Foundation for Women, Newman's Own, Robin Hood, Rockefeller Brothers Fund. I mean, I could go on, but there are some heavy hitters in here. And I know that you conducted 50 interviews, and these are really the personal stories of these leaders of these major nonprofits. And some of them are household names, some aren't, but they follow a pattern. You use, generally speaking, a set of questions, and it's fascinating how all the different answers that these very diverse group of nonprofit leaders give to those questions. And then, of course, you have the book organized under different, topics, such as sharpen your leadership skills and ensure your own house is in order. And under those headings, these interviews are organized. So one of the things I wanted to touch on is the 50 interviews were conducted, 21 of them were included, and we talked a little bit about this off the air. Very difficult making those choices, right?
Yes, because we loved them all. They were all really powerful, compelling stories and insights. And we wanted to make sure that nearly every field in the nonprofit sector, which is very diverse just by field alone, social services, health sciences, advocacy, environment, the arts, education, you could go on. But then also we needed to make sure that it represented diverse leaders in terms of race and gender in particular. And it's still not that easy to do.
Never an easy task.
We had to reach out beyond, our own connections, and sometimes we won and sometimes we didn't. We really wanted to interview Anthony Romero of the ACLU, for instance. But right after the presidential elections, he was very busy.
Was a little busy, yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanted to touch on this classic question of tell us about a couple of your favorites in here.
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to. Now, understanding that they're all my favorite. They're all my children, right?
Of course.
But there's a theme that I want to talk about because it's relevant, I think, to the entire listening audience tonight. And that is we asked questions that were about people, their profession, their personal lives, their profession, and public policy. And one of the questions in public policy was, how does the nonprofit sector help to bridge the urban-rural divide in this country within a global economy? And nearly everyone had a good answer for that, a desire to convene. For example, and I'd like to just quote Darlene Fadun of Bethel Woods, the CEO of Bethel Woods Center for the Arts, about this. And she touched on this, and Barbara, you and I, we've been working around this issue for the last decade, really, with the 6 nonprofit leadership summits that I co-chaired and produced for the last couple of years at Bethel Woods Center for the Arts, who in full disclosure, has also been a client of H2 Growth Strategy
and an employer of mine.
Yes, right. And we wanted to bring more private foundation support to Sullivan County, again, a rural area. It's very difficult. The vast majority of private foundation support goes to urban areas around the country. And so when we asked Darlene, what would you say to the world's billionaire philanthropists, if there were one thing you would say, she said, invest more in rural communities. They have some of the same issues but really lack the resources to address them. Strike a balance between looking for immediate, numbers-oriented results and investment in people and programs that over time can have significant impacts. And understand that many social issues are complex and have several underlying and compelling causes, and allow for trial and error and innovation. So we're taking this theme, and Bank of New York Mellon is offering to host an assembly of all nearly 50 people that we interviewed to see if we can move the needle on bridging the urban-rural divide, with the aim of putting together a policy paper on best practices that we'd share with the public, both the public and private sector. So that's one direction that this book is inspiring, and that we're taking on as a next step.
Well, it's good to see that the book didn't start and end only on the pages of it.
I wanted to say another thing about a favorite excerpt, because one of the things that surprised me on the personal side was how many of the men talked about how important it was to have work-life balance, really talking about emotional intelligence or awareness. And I just, if I have a minute,
sure.
I'd like to just read what Leon Botstein said about the worst time. He's president of Bard College, so again, New York. He said, by far the worst thing that ever happened to me was I had a daughter who was killed at the age of 8. That puts all other disappointments and failures in relief. What I learned from that is that one needs to find a way to rescue victory from the jaws of defeat, so to speak, rather than turning disappointment and tragedy into an excuse for feeling like a powerless victim. I try to recognize the unintended gift that comes from tragedy and failure. It's like a prize fight. The key is having the ability to get up again after getting knocked down. You can't control what happens, and you're constantly at the mercy of the unexpected. So you need to be fully aware of the tenuousness of any plan or notion that you can control.
That is, very moving and very instructional as well. I can see why that was a favorite outtake of you, or excerpt from the book. Similar to, in my view, is his name Shale? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
From the Bank Street College of Education, who lost his wife when she was 30, also taking a tragic instance, and saying that this is what he said. It taught me a lot about how important it is to really use your life. So that's just something that I think we often neglect, is to actually use our lives. So Linda, just very briefly, I know one of the questions that it reoccurs here is what keeps you up at night? What keeps you up at night?
Well, it has been, I believe, after the presidential elections in particular, what's driving me is that I really believe if we can find greater common ground between urban and rural, with all the stats that come out with every election, whether it's a state, a local election, a U.S. election, it boils down to this urban-rural divide in thinking and in needs. And I think that if we can find greater common ground, that this country will benefit and people will vote more moderately. That's what keeps me up at night, because it's something that I want to make a difference in.
Okay, then we've been talking with Linda C. Hartley, the co-author of Big Impact, Insights and Stories from America's Nonprofit Leaders. Quickly, Linda, how can someone get this book?
They can go to our website. That's the easiest way, www.h2growth, growth.com, so h2growth.com.
Thank you so much, Linda, and best of luck with it. We'll be checking back in with you about that Bank of New York conference.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, take care.
Take care, Barbara. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.